Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I'm Venkat. I'm part of the team here at the archives at NCBS, and it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome all of you to one of Preetha's sessions that she's been conducting. We've had a couple of informal sessions where we've discussed her work in the past, but today's is quite special as a public event also, and she'll give you more details about that. But before I'll get out of your way, and I'll just give you a very brief introduction to Preetha and her work. As some of you do know, Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair is the current Obaid Siddiqi Chair in the History and Culture of Science 2024-2025. She's a historian of science, and her research spans a fascinating range of topics, including the history of science, modernity, and enlightenment at the turn of the 19th century, history and politics of collecting for science, the sociology of knowledge, the public museum, and women in science in colonial and post-colonial India. Among her notable publications, one of which is going to be referred to in today's talk, are Chromosome Woman, Nomad Scientist, E.K. Janaki Ammal, Alive 1897 to 1984, Science and the Changing Environment in India, a guide to sources in the India Office records at the British Library from 1780 to 1920, which was a work that she co-authored with Richard Axelby, and her work on Raja Sarfoji too, Science, Medicine, and Enlightenment in Tanjore, 1786 to 1832. The talk today is part of a set of conversations that Preetha has been doing on looking at the intersection of science across a variety of disciplines. And today's talk is titled Inventing a Scientific Career Across Borders, the case of two cytogeneticists, Eileen W. Erlanson, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, Preetha, yes, and E.K. Janaki Ammal in the 1930s. Preetha, over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today's talk is based on a paper that is just that's forthcoming in volume published by Manchester University Press, and it's called Negotiating the Invisible. So the paper today focuses on an as yet overlooked historical episode from the 1930s of two women. It involves two women, one British American and the other Asian or Indian, bonding over science transnationally and at the fringes of institutions, doing science in each other's company or in close proximity, and at the time of the Great Depression. It sheds light chiefly on the struggles encountered and strategies adopted by highly accomplished but little known trailblazing British American biologist Eileen Jessie Whitehead Erlanson, 1899-2001. She lived a very, very long life. She was later called Eileen Macfarlane. So this is about how she found a livelihood commensurate with her education research experience during the Great Slump. Eileen's life between 1933 and 1936 serves as an object lesson, even a role model, on how forging robust connections across national and disciplinary borders was crucial to inventing a scientific career at a time when employment opportunities were especially grim for educated women, let alone scientists. In her case, the cross-border experiment was facilitated by a close woman contemporary, the Indian plant cytogeneticist Janaki Ammal, 1897 born. She was elder to Eileen by 3 years, a couple of years. It was a relationship that would last 6 decades. Eileen was perhaps the earliest woman anywhere in the world to be awarded both a PhD in 1928 from the University of Michigan and DSc in genetics from the University of London in 1930. And of those born prior to 1900, one of the most adventurous, prolific, and public a personality. She ironically remains unknown, with the exception of James Cattell's American Men of Science. She appears in the American Men of Science, which just mentions her name. She does not even appear in the classical Margaret Rossiter volumes, with their focus on employment issues. This is even more surprising given that she was one of only a few biologists to find a place in the Radcliffe Women in Science exhibit of 1936, part of the tercentenary celebrations of the Harvard University. So this is just a detail from a photograph showing the young Eileen Erlanson with the herpetologist geneticist Frida Blanchard seated. During the Great Depression, American women were encouraged to pursue higher education, though their employment options remained largely limited by societal expectations and the overall economic climate. While some women entered traditionally male-dominated fields, including science, they also saw increased opportunities in areas like teaching, nursing, and social work. The Depression prompted many women to enter or remain in the workforce, thanks to Roosevelt's New Deal, to support their families and challenge traditional gender roles. Thanks in particular to his enlightened spouse, Eleanor Roosevelt. These were times, however, when even women with advanced degrees could not find job positions. Among the chief institutions hiring plant geneticists in America at this time were colleges, botanical gardens, and horticultural societies. Eileen was alert to every possible opening, if ever there was one, and would tirelessly contact heads of institutions, sometimes well ahead of the position being advertised. And even while laid up and immobile, post a horrific motor accident in the Mojave Desert that had also involved the geneticist Dobzhansky and his spouse. Within a month's time, she had applied to nearly 50 universities and colleges and had been met with a refusal from most of them. She was particularly disappointed to learn that the College of William and Mary, where her late husband Grimes had been based, did not want anyone good like herself. How do they expect to build up a course in cytology? She asked her Michigan mentor, Bartlett, H.H. Bartlett, clearly peeved. Not one to give up easily, Eileen probed him to ascertain if Ralph Cheney, professor of biology at Long Island University, was known, whether he knew Cheney. She had read in the journal Science, dated 10 July 1931, that the Brooklyn Garden was to be affiliated to the Long Island University, and that Cheney had been made resident investigator of economic plants. Do you happen to know him? She asked Bartlett. The university is new, and I would certainly like to get a position in that sort of institute. It would not matter if one had to begin with a small salary if there was a future. They ought to get good younger people in such departments. The difficulty is that when there's a vacancy, it's usually filled by someone known to the head of the department. Don't think is it very different now? I don't know. So nothing would come of all this, but her determination to be as active and useful as possible remained undiminished. On the health front, she was still far from robust. Just as she was growing despondent, she received a letter from her Michigan friend and fellow plant cytogeneticist, E.K. Janaki Ammal, inviting her to Travancore, a princely state in the southwest of India. The invitation would not have arrived at a better time for her. Excited at the prospect of going east to collect plants, conduct research, and reunite with her old friend, Eileen wasted no time informing Bartlett. They shared the same mentor, Janaki and Eileen, of the new development. A letter has just arrived from Janaki saying that she has been appointed head of the Department of Botany at the Maharaja's College of Science, Travancore. The appointment is for 2 years, while the regular professor is getting his doctor's degree in England. She says that they have fine laboratories and excellent opportunities for collecting in a monsoon area. She has invited me to come out for a year and promises all facilities and no expenses. Eileen only needed to save about $500 for the journey, which looked quite easily achievable to her. She wanted to get away from the appalling drudgery of her teaching at the Kent State College, Ohio, which she felt would crush her between the professional educationalists and the ignorance and inertia of the students. These are her lines. Her years of training, she concluded, were wasted at that place. Eileen was keen on accepting Janaki's invitation. It really is a fine opportunity, and I do not see why a year spent in that manner would militate against my getting a position afterwards. If our civilization is going to pieces, one would be all well off in the tropics as in a colder region, she rationalized. She wanted Bartlett's opinion on this and asked him to pen a letter to Janaki, who is missing him very much. If you will come to India on the way, that is from his fieldwork in Southeast Asia, she will come to meet you with the state elephants. Eileen joked all excited, while also stating that her aim in life was to do a lot of research, but it would help to make enough to defray living expenses. Janaki would have no doubts agreed. As for Janaki Ammal, she had earned a doctorate from the University of Michigan in 1931 for her cytogenetic work on the Nicandra under the supervision of Bradley M. Davis, the first Indian woman, Janaki, to achieve this milestone in the botanical sciences. In late 1931, when Eileen was desperately looking for employment in America, Janaki was heading home to India to take up a research position in Madras. She had been negotiating with her former teacher, Todlai Kambaram of the Madras University, while in England. She'd actually spent 3 months at the John Innes Horticultural Institution, working with Cyril Darlington. So even while in England, Janaki had inquired about a possible position at the newly established University Botanical Laboratory under Todlai Kambaram's charge. Thanks to Kambaram's recommendation, a research fellowship in 1932-33 was awarded to Janaki by the Madras University. This came as a great blessing because she'd arrived penniless from England and had been forced to borrow from an elder brother to make ends meet. Kambaram had further assigned her the task of developing a university botanical garden. Collecting for it gave her immense joy and even reminded her of the botanical garden at Ann Arbor. But she soon realized the university fellowship was far from sufficient to maintain herself. Moreover, the UBL, the University Botanical Laboratory, appointment was only a year-long arrangement. Thus, Janaki began looking out for a position in the agriculture department, the only other place besides a teaching institution in India where someone with her qualifications, PhD in plant cytogenetics, could hope to find decent employment. Timely for her, the government sugarcane expert, T.S. Venkatraman of the breeding station at Coimbatore, applied to the Imperial Council of Agricultural Research for a cytological assistant, precisely with Janaki in mind, to assist with the cytology of the saccharum, sugarcane. Even before she could be appointed officially at Coimbatore, Janaki set up a small cytology laboratory at the Presidency College, her alma mater in Madras, to work on some of Venkatraman's sugarcane material. She had also been asked to supervise 3 male students working on their MSc theses and to encourage cytological studies at Madras University. This was the first time cytology was being taught to university students and none of the male members of the botany department at the Presidency College were qualified to do so. The sugarcane material she was studying was producing interesting results, but all the same, Janaki was distressed she was not participating in India's struggle for freedom. She was also becoming increasingly apprehensive about the move to Coimbatore because she dreaded its Brahminical and patriarchal climate and preferred cosmopolitan Madras to it. All this, of course, can be read in much detail in my biography of Janaki Ammal, chromosome woman, nomad scientist. It suffices here to state that Janaki was struggling to make a living despite the temporary research position at the UBL. And it was thus mere desperation that had led her to accept the offer of professorship at the Maharaja's College of Science in Trivandrum, which is the capital city of the princely state of Travancore. And for a person from Malabar, which was part of the Madras presidency, the region, Trivandrum or Travancore, but for the language was almost a different state, if not country. This appointment, again, was not on a permanent footing, but she had created history, Janaki. It was the first ever time a woman had been appointed to a professorship in what was an all-men's college. News of the appointment was reported in Indian newspapers and also the Michigan Daily. She was, however, not entirely pleased with her newfound position. Although it made her comfortable financially, she worried her research would be put on the back burner. She was willing to sacrifice any amount of money and comfort for facilities and quiet to do research and become a recognized scientist, she would say. Janaki felt like a real scientist, these are her words, only when she sent out a research note on the cytology of the Cleome viscosa to the journal Current Science, which had just been founded in 1932 as India's first journal exclusively devoted to science. Meanwhile, Janaki had sent Eileen a second letter from Trivandrum in which she offered to arrange an honorary position for her in Madras, such as head of herbarium, the present herbarium being very poor and must be built up for the honors botany classes. Also in her mind was the directorship of the UBL. Janaki believed that biology was stagnant in South India and that Eileen could do a lot for its advance, even in the short span of a year. She was acting on the conviction the greater the number of applications, better the chances of appointing a good scientist to such positions. Promptly, Eileen requested Bartlett to recommend her for the ultimate good of science, she said. She did not think of herself as a brilliant botanist, by which she meant a theoretician, say like a Darlington or Haldane. It was certain she had a good deal of experience in herbarium, garden, and laboratory. Eileen was certain that she could do more good for science and research than in pure teaching. This was exactly what Janaki hoped for, that Eileen would get across to the authorities at Trivandrum the importance of research over teaching. In her letter to Bartlett, Eileen did not omit to express concern about Ohio going through bad times, with the colleges and universities taking the brunt of it, and the salaries of the teaching staff being drastically slashed. Given the situation, the Travancore Madras job was the best bet, she thought, even if it meant leaving America and translocating to an entirely unknown part of the world. Although their friendship would last close to 6 decades, the focus in what follows is limited to a telling stage in their relationship, which was 1933 to 36, a period of transition for both women, when employment opportunities were at their lowest. Eileen was granted a year's leave of absence by the Kent State College authorities on the recommendation of Bartlett. She was due to sail for India on 22nd September 1933, but suffered a major setback on the health front, a complication that had arisen from a bladder surgery she'd undergone in Pasadena after the horrific accident in the Mojave Desert. Meanwhile, the British marine biologist based at the Natural History Museum, London, Geoffrey Tandy, an algae specialist, whom she had met on the boat from America, had introduced her to Kenneth Codrington, at this time honorary lecturer of archaeology at the School of Oriental and African Studies. She would have many meetings with Codrington during her stay in London, and her mother lived in Putney, which gave her several hints as to how she could use her time in India fruitfully for research. Codrington suggested that Eileen turn to collecting physical anthropology measurements, get height-weight ratios, he said, he instructed, for which purpose she got hold of a pair of good bathroom scales, besides a good pair of second-hand calipers from the Royal Anthropological Institute, London, just for a guinea. What remained for procurement was a head spanner for the auricular radii, which was very expensive, and unless a decently priced one could be found locally, she decided getting one in India with Janaki's help was more prudent. As for J.B.S. Haldane, whom Eileen knew well, suggested that she first learn Malayalam, the language spoken in Travancore. Amidst all this preparation, Eileen played it safe. She did not omit to initiate the necessary proceedings to obtain a DSc from the University of London for her work on rose cytotaxonomy. She was one of the world leaders in the field of experimental taxonomy. She also ensured that Bartlett complete the necessary formalities to appoint her an honorary research fellow at the University Botanical Gardens, Ann Arbor, which would allow her to continue her connection with Michigan, if and when she returned from India. Eileen eventually set sail for India on 3rd November 1933 and arrived in Trivandrum only a couple of months after the John Innes cytogeneticist Darlington had left Trivandrum. He had been invited there by Janaki. In an interview with the Michigan Daily, just prior to her departure, Eileen spoke of the future possibilities Janaki had envisioned for her, Dr. Janaki expects to obtain some honorary appointment from the Maharani for me to make my position official. It may be in connection with the herbarium of the college or as the head of a botanical survey of Travancore, which I shall have to organize. She's eager to advance science and scientific research and appointed my friend, Dr. Janaki, to a high position in what had formerly been strictly a men's college. Being the only woman professor at the College of Science, Trivandrum, Janaki began a close association with the staff members of the Maharaja's College for Women in the city. Women like the Cambridge-educated Louisa Carolina Maria Oakirk, of Dutch origin and British nationality, who was a professor of economics, and others like the botanist Mercia Janet and Sosa P. John, who were the first women to research at the UBL Madras. They were appointed at the Women's College in Trivandrum. Much like Eileen, it was joblessness during the 1930s that had driven Oakirk, an MA from Newnham College, Cambridge, to accept the offer of the princely state of Travancore. Forming an informal sisterhood of sorts, the jolly group enjoyed themselves thoroughly, with frequent visits to the beaches. Sometimes they had an incredibly large tea on the rocks after swimming their saris or swimming costumes. They even drew up a 5-year plan for brighter Trivandrum, which involved laughter, song, and dance. The more mixed, the better. Janaki's presence in Trivandrum was for Oakirk and the others greatly empowering, and vice versa. Within only a year of her joining the Women's College, Oakirk had founded the Trivandrum branch of the International Fellowship, which aimed to connect Britishers and Indians. The cosmopolitan Eileen was quick to integrate into this group of women academics in Trivandrum. This is not to say that the relationship between Eileen and Janaki was always harmonious. Like any, it had its ups and downs. Eileen would remark on Janaki's tendency to become morbid on occasion, which led to much unpleasantness. After a particularly bad episode, Eileen even decided to return to America, but then Janaki, in a matter of minutes, turned bold-faced and became her usual caring and warm self. Eileen would eventually spend a year of research and travel in Travancore and Malabar in the capacity of honorary professor of botany at the Maharaja's College of Science, Trivandrum. So within a short period of her arrival in Travancore, Eileen would write to Bartlett that she was very happy in Trivandrum and had begun to make forays into physical anthropology, chiefly taking measurements. In line with Codrington's suggestions, her focus had turned to the study of physical growth across castes. She found herself busy measuring fisher folk beside school students of the city, taking height and weight measurements of 500 boys and girls of different diet groups. Eileen discovered that her job prospects in Travancore were not taking off as expected. But being the incredibly dynamic person that she was, managed to persuade the Travancore government to allow her the use of the state car, surprising even Janaki, to make special trips to the high ranges to study tribes and also collect plants. She thoroughly enjoyed these excursions, despite these being physically demanding on her. The chief secretary was so impressed by her passion that he also allowed her the use of a motor launch on a big dammed lake in the hills, she called it, which is the Periyar Lake. And the Periyar Tiger Reserve had just been, founded, established that year, 1934. She must have been one of the earliest visitors to the place. So she said, scarcely anyone gets to use this motor launch, except the royal family, viceregal parties, and the British resident, she wrote to Bartlett, with obvious pride in having been permitted its use. So accompanied by a forest ranger, and just figuring out that is Archie Wilfred Wood, she visited the tribal Urali village in the forests. They were, Eileen explained to the very curious Bartlett, wandering agriculturalists and lived in tree houses at night. She took still pictures and movies of them because it would interest Bartlett very much. On this tour, Eileen was accompanied by the state archaeologist R. Vasudeva Podwal. who had been directed by the head of the government, the Divan, to provide her with all assistance. Together, they visited Cape Comorin and several locations in the high ranges, such as Pyramid, Kumali, Vandi Periyar, Devikulam in the extreme northeast corner of Travancore, where hundreds of dolmens existed, the megalithic Munira dolmens of Marayur, about 50 kilometers from Munnar, bordering Tamil Nadu. Another day was devoted to collecting in the forests, this time with the forest ranger and Muduan trackers. That's when they came across a dangerous solitary tusker elephant. Eileen had taken some nice cine Kodak pictures of everyday life in Travancore and some hill tribes. But most of these tribes, she noted, had become contaminated or dying out, a concern shared by Janaki, and the reason she wanted Butler to visit India at the earliest. Eileen was able to collect physical measurements of tribal women, and this was the first time this was being done. The Madras Museum curator, Edgar Thurston, with K. Rangachari, if you know the book Castes and the 7 volumes Castes and Tribes of Southern India, published 1909, they were not able to accomplish this because the husbands would not allow men to do this, take measurements. So even with Eileen, the women were very shy, but she got them to yield to her. For both Janaki and Eileen in Trivandrum, holidays were invariably devoted to plant collecting excursions. Several plant specimens, including marine algae, would be sent in their joint names to the Herbarium of Harvard University, the Field Museum of Natural History, Chicago, and the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Michigan, of course. Among those sent to Harvard in their joint names was a syzygium to the Pulianarkota Hill in the suburbs of Trivandrum. In early January 1934, after they returned to Trivandrum from Malabar, where they had gone to visit Janaki's house in Talasheri, where they also did some collecting, the two were once again engaged in extensive collection of marine algae in Trivandrum, along the beaches for dispatch to some of the world's leading herbaria. An outgoing person, sometimes to the point of annoyance to Janaki, Eileen began exploring Trivandrum and its surroundings on her own. And at other times when Janaki was busy in the company of her women friends attached to the Women's College. She'd also hired a young boy to carry the plant press for her when she went about collecting. Eileen would dispatch one lot of seeds to the United States Department of Agriculture and spend several days identifying the plants and fixing labels. One set was to reach the University of Michigan. She assured Bartlett that the transportation charges would be taken care of, as she had arranged for a loan from England to tide over the expenses. Janaki had also single-handedly built up a large collection of Travancore and Malabar flora. They worked on the flora together, sometimes through the night, chatting away. If Janaki was too busy correcting examination papers or preparing for classes, Eileen worked on them herself. The Forest Office herbarium in Trivandrum, she thought, was very good, with many of the sheets determined not very long ago by experts at Kew, which helped her with identification. Eileen would occasionally also make short visits to Madras, to the Presidency College and the Queen Mary's College, to have specimens, particularly the Presidency, to have specimens identified. She was thus very much at home even when Janaki was not accompanying her. So you can see Eileen in a sari on the extreme right. And this should be, this, I guess, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was taken in the Queen Mary's College. Eileen would also build up a large collection of anthropological articles and articles of ethnographic interest, including bows and arrows, traps, mats, etc., made by the hill tribes, which went on to become, which I discovered, are today part of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of Michigan. And these are from there. These objects, all labeled, along with the plant specimens, which are about 600 accession numbers in newspapers. The plants were packed in newspapers with field numbers written on the margin. All of these articles were dispatched to America. They were sent by a barge from Trivandrum to Coelho in care of Harrison and Crossfield. And Harrison and Crossfield, it was Harrison Crossfield then, and today it's Harrison Malayalam plantations. In so doing, Eileen had turned into a veritable collector, a woman counterpart to her mentor Bartlett, or her exact contemporary Walter Norman Kells, the Michigan zoologist, collector of natural history and artifacts, and museum curator, even if she'd not collected on that scale. But this was only the beginning. Incidentally, Kells was in India on a 2-year collecting mission for the University of Michigan around the same time, 1932-34, and Kells and Janaki meet at Talasheri, which is in my book. Eileen seemed to have stumbled upon a new career, or a sub-career, as a collector of things Indian, a prospect that might not have happened had she not seized the cross-border opportunity and bonded with a close woman contemporary from the East, however different by way of personality from herself. By about May 1934, Eileen had traveled to Madras, well ahead of her departure to America via Japan. She inspected the university herbarium at Janaki's suggestion to figure out how it could be improved and rendered useful for the honors botany classes. It was also during her stay in Madras that she met a Scottish engineer, James B. Macfarlane, employed with the Burma Shell Company. They were soon engaged, much to the surprise of all her friends, and they planned to marry in London 6 months later. While her women contemporaries in science, like Janaki, Rosalind Franklin, or Barbara McClintock, and several others, chose to remain single to focus on their careers, Eileen thought otherwise. She believed that she was a very fortunate person to get another chance at a normal, happy family life. She was already married twice before. So she's had various troubles in the past 12 years. She was happy having had a new chance, a good chance at a normal, happy family life. She was convinced that science was a good field for women if they did not mix up love with emotions and become vegetables. The only problem, she stated, was that women can't concentrate on their work once they fall in love. Then by the time they've got their heads out of the clouds, they're 10 years behind time in their field. Eileen was clearly in the minority among successful women scientists of the times for her view that marriage did not necessarily get in the way of a woman's career in science. In an interview given to a local American newspaper in her later years, Eileen would claim that Macfarlane, whom she had met while doing physical anthropology in India, was always interested in her work, not jealous about her achievements. In fact, she thought marriage was a solution to life's several problems, which comes something of a surprise. Speaking of Janaki on an earlier occasion, Eileen commented, "Janaki thinks that her work is the only joy she has in life, and in it she feels very much alone, since there's nobody to discuss it with. I feel very sorry for her. If she could only find some Indian biologist and could marry and help him, I think it would solve all her difficulties." Eileen's finances continued to be poor, and the Travancore stint had not turned out good after all, making a return to the Kent State College, at least for a semester, inevitable. She would, however, return to India in a matter of months, and this time as Mrs. Macfarlane, that's how she liked to call herself, and settle down in Cochin, the princely state of Cochin. It was also a port city on the what's called the Malabar coast of India, where her husband, an engineer with the Burma Shell, was now posted. As soon as she landed in Cochin in March 1935, despite the trying weather, Eileen began an anthropometric study of the small ancient colony of white Jews of Cochin, who she found exceedingly fascinating as a geneticist, because they were all interrelated and were only 70 in number. She was also interested in an outcast group in South Malabar. All physical anthropology until this point in India was a prerogative of male practitioners, the likes of Thurston and Rangachari in South India and B.S. Guha in Bengal. And they were all limited to male subjects, and including the physical measurements. On the contrary, Eileen's focus as a biologist, geneticist, was invariably in the outliers, the outcasts, and mixed race populations, which she found aplenty in India thanks to her cross-border adventure. And she relied on blood groups besides physical measurements, as a guiltless and objective basis for ordering the human races. Through her pioneering serological researches among these people, she had extended the frontiers of biology and contributed to the making of a new field of knowledge called seroanthropology. In fact, by the late 1930s, Eileen had ended up becoming one of the founders of the field of human genetics, alongside people like Haldane. Her work would, however, come to an abrupt halt when she was accidentally poisoned with mercury chloride, perhaps while killing plants for desiccation, and had to be hospitalized for 3 weeks in Cochin. She would also have to leave Cochin for Madras soon because her spouse had been transferred back to the city. Going to Madras was another upheaval for her, and she was far from comfortable this time. There was a plan to offer her an honorary fellowship at Madras University, something there was no precedent for. But her husband was unimpressed and insisted that a salaried position was to be preferred. He had begun to feel that she was spending too much time and energy, not to mention money, for those and not those resident in India. As for Madras University, it was hiring directly from Britain, not from European residents in India like herself. And this deeply disappointed Eileen. To keep her American citizenship from lapsing, she ensured Frida Blanchard renewed her honorary appointment as fellow of the University Garden at Michigan. If previously Eileen had felt her talents were being wasted in America, she now complained to Bartlett that she was feeling cramped in Madras and that the world was not getting the benefits it would receive from her training and natural gifts. She was convinced that she had more enthusiasm, ability, personality, and worthwhile experience than most people, and that her talents were being wasted in India. An exasperating place, which had not improved under the Indianization policy of the British. It was safe to look for a suitable position in America at the earliest, she decided, while she was still physically able. Probably you still have several poor, deserving botanists on your hands, she wrote to Bartlett. But I hope you will agree with me that I have something unusual to give any college or research institution or botanic garden. I think that the idea that a job is a charity affair and should be given to the person who is poorest or has the most dependents is pernicious, as bad as the communal idea in India, she commented. Her desperation became more evident when she wrote to Bartlett, there must be a place for me somewhere, after all the pains I have been to get the training and degrees. Will you please keep me in mind until 1938 if you hear anything? She was willing to return to America and take up a teaching position at Howard University, or even better, the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. Eileen was once again ready to send out her curriculum vitae to institutions, but waited to hear from Bartlett. The study of the blood groups of the white Jews would be resumed upon return to Cochin from Madras in the new year of 1936. She did a thorough job of whatever the subject of her research, reading all the relevant literature, accessing a network of experts for help and confirmation, writing book reviews, besides conducting original research on the field. In this case, the expert in question was L.K. Ananthakrishnan, South Indian anthropologist L.K. Ananthakrishnan Nair, 1861-1937, who described the Malabar Jews in his Castes and Tribes of Cochin, Volume 2, 1912, from an ethnographical point of view. Eileen made friends wherever she went. Some among them were highly influential members of society who would play important parts in forwarding her research, thanks to her capacity for negotiation and an eye and respect for local specificities, including wearing the Indian sari. In Cochin, it was through S.S. Coder, the wealthy white Jew, a younger contemporary, that she was able to gain access to this otherwise closed community of Jews, also called Paradeshi Jews or Malabar Jews, and collected blood samples from them. The first time anyone had done this. Her presence in Cochin and the association with someone as important as Coder, which promptly reported by the local English newspaper, in fact, the only English newspaper to be published from Cochin, the Malabar Herald. It said Dr. Mrs. Macfarlane, who's making a research study of the various races of Malabar by an examination of their blood, is now in Cochin testing the blood of white and black Jews. She's a guest of Mr. S.S. Coder, Cochin. As noted earlier, Eileen was rarely at a loss for biological subjects to research upon, even in a place like Cochin, which could not boast of anything like a botanic garden or a biological station or a laboratory. She would, in fact, undertake a diverse set of research problems and coterminously at that during her residence at this port city. For instance, in April 1935, she embarked on a survey of marine boring organisms, which were found stuck under the boats, and an analysis of the flora of the largest man-made island by dredging. It had just come into being, the Willingdon Island, named after Lord Willingdon. Even while researching, she was doing all this even while researching the blood groups of the Jews of Cochin, and also continuing her study of Malabar flora, which she had begun as soon as she had reached Trivandrum. That even the harbor could be approached as a biological field station, offering singular opportunities to the biologist, was what Eileen ingeniously demonstrated in Cochin. In the newly constructed artificial island through dredging, she discovered an ideal subject for understanding the process of plant colonization in the tropics. As for the survey of marine boring organisms that destroyed wooden crafts, which she undertook in parallel, it was a pioneering subject from the point of view of both taxonomy and economics, so much so that her research was reported in the newspapers. She would make a collection of these destructive crustaceans and send them to experts to confirm their identification and names. The British and European contacts chosen for this purpose were her exact contemporaries, the brilliant Scottish woman, zoologist, carcinologist, Isabella Gordon of the Natural History Museum, London, and the French naturalist, Africa explorer, and future anti-nuclear activist Theodore Monod, who is also an expert on isopods. Locally, she relied on the expertise of biologists like M.O. Parthasarathy Iyengar, who had been introduced to her by Janaki, besides R. Gopal Iyer of the Madras University, to resolve the many scientific issues involved in the project. It was vitally important for Eileen to convert any and every piece of research accomplished, however preliminary or modest in scope, either as academic papers or as communications to the public in the form of illustrated lectures at scientific and other institutions, locally and abroad, or as articles in popular magazines and newspapers like The Statesman. These were indispensable components of her scientific practice, and something she had already demonstrated in America and Britain in the context of the American wild rose. The cross-border quest would expand the breadth of her research interests and make her more prolific. There was much that was new and exciting to investigate and communicate to the world from the biological point of view, whether it be the jottings of her impressions after 6 weeks of life in Trivandrum, which she wished Frida Blanchard would send to a university newspaper or a journal for publication, or her preliminary investigations on heredity and racial difference based on blood group analysis, which she would appear as some special articles in the foremost South Indian newspapers. Her eagerness to reach out to the public was clearly evident. The driving force behind her research was usefulness. Even while confined to a hospital bed in Cochin, she wrote a short note for the Malabar Herald on the state of care provided by the government hospital and how it might be improved. In late 1935, Eileen, we know, wrote to Bartlett asking him for advice about what she could do with her anthropological data, whether the Michigan Academy of Sciences was a good place for publishing it, or would a British journal suit it better? Eventually, her first note on the white Jews, an ethnographic study of Malabar Jewish wedding, would appear in the Maharaja's College magazine, Cochin. And her preliminary findings based on the serological data collected from the community, from the Jews, would find a place in Current Science, which had just come into being. Or rather, it's just been around since 2 years. It was founded in 1932, the Current Science. She was only the third woman after Eleanor Mason and Janaki to publish in the Current Science. Eileen had gone one step further, however. She found herself on the journal's board of editors and wrote the editorial for the issue devoted to human genetics. And this, we're talking of March 1936, in which Number, her paper on the white Jews, also had appeared, besides another, which provided summaries of lectures delivered on cytogenetics in the state of Mysore. She would go on to publish several more articles in the journal over the next few months and years. Her preliminary reflections on the marine boring organisms of the Cochin Harbor would also find a place in the current science. As for the paper on plant colonization on Willingdon Island, this would appear in the Journal of the Botanical Society, thanks to Janaki, who was secretary of the society at this time. On return to America after her first stint in India, Eileen confidently delivered at the University of Michigan an illustrated lecture on the botany and anthropology of southern India. That's how she titled it, marking the beginning of a parallel career in America as India expert. In fact, on one occasion, she wondered if she should register with some agency as a public lecturer, and which she would eventually do. Incidentally, Eileen had been trying to land a job with the Mysore state, but nothing came of it. Filled with anxiety at being jobless, she concluded that India would never be a white man's country, and it was even harder on white women, and that her talents and education were too good to waste. She also feared her husband's lifespan would be drastically cut short if they stayed on, and was determined not to remain in India after his impending retirement in 1938. In any case, she decided not to get rusty until then. Ironically, this was the very time, while unemployed and despondent in Madras, that she would receive news of being showcased as one of the world's outstanding women scientists in an exhibition held as part of the Harvard University's centenary celebrations. So if I could just sort of conclude, just make a few remarks here. Both cytogeneticists, Eileen Erlanson and Janaki Ammal, were acutely aware of their vulnerability in the face of shackling social and cultural values, the lack of employment opportunities for high-achieving women like themselves at this time in particular, the need to build robust local and even transnational networks, and to be surrounded by women who are firm if they were to negotiate social hurdles and shape their varied scientific careers. Access to Janaki's academic position, her generosity, and her social networks in India were crucial to Eileen in making her cross-border quest fruitful. And the bonding was equally fruitful and empowering for Janaki, while she began a new phase of life in sedate Trivandrum, both socially and from the point of view of so new a science as genetics. Eileen's Travancore and Cochin sojourns were a demonstration of how a creative, alert, and persevering, even persistent biologist could never be at a loss to find subjects for research. She was in fact setting a role model for others to follow. She valued mobility, was unafraid of crossing borders, national and disciplinary, quickly assimilated local specificities, tapped into and expanded her social networks, seized every opportunity that came her way to explore and investigate the importance of being self-supportive. Marriage for her was not a hurdle to doing science, but it was crucial to be financially independent. Also central to her practice was the refashioning of every piece of research accomplished, however modest in scope, into publications or lectures or both academic lectures and popular lectures. It was important for her to leave her mark everywhere she lived, and equally the fact of having lived everywhere. Among the strategies she adopted to subsist as a scientist, if not thrive, was to invent a varied career as against a unidimensional one. In her case, in addition to being a rose geneticist, she was already a rose geneticist when she reached India. By virtue of having crossed borders, she'd also become a seroanthropologist, human geneticist, collector, popular science writer, traveler, public lecturer, and an expert in India, in America, albeit in the making. So this biographical case study reveals how the cartography of a discipline, in this case genetics, sometimes changed when practiced in complex social and political settings, resulting in new fields of knowledge, such as human genetics and seroanthropology. Eileen's multifaceted practice was fired by a sense of usefulness and involved surveys and the use of biological techniques to address social problems. If genetics, her field of specialization, was crucial to comprehending human heredity, physiology, and evolution, it also opened a window into public health, racial and gender differences, blood ties, and the very fabric of social life, local life in India. Her anthropological research, although in a preliminary stage, pointed to the gender gaps extant in South Indian society, especially with respect to growth and nutrition, for instance. And also in the very practice of the discipline of physical anthropology until then, which had been an exclusively male domain. Not least, Eileen's anthropological interventions of the early 1930s in Travancore and Cochin provide us with the early and rare glimpse of a woman, a Western woman in this case, woman anthropologist at work in a colonial setting. So I end the PowerPoint here, but I would like to move to this film, which is just about 3.56 minutes. Just wanted to introduce the film to you. So in London, just after her marriage to James Macfarlane, she married in London, was solemnized, Eileen made a presentation at the Royal Anthropological Institute, London, complete with lantern slides and the short film she had shot with her Kodak camera on the hill tribes and fisher folk of Travancore, which I had already mentioned. She would also screen the same in the Madras Rotary Club, which aroused much public interest. So a year ago, I happened to rediscover these films, these 16mm moving films, movies. They were in a very poor, very bad state, which can only be imagined. And I am now in the process of restoring these. So today I will be playing you a restored section of the films. And this would be the first time any audience in the world after the 1940s would have watched these. So that's what you're going to be watching today. This is the result of a really painful but brilliant restoration attempt by the Prasad Digital Labs, Chennai. The process continues, and the demand on funds is huge for such a project, as you will know. And before I can move on to the next set of films, I will need to first secure funds. So what you're going to see are 5 short cinematic films. You have one, and she's, luckily for us, she's actually titled them. So the first one is preparing for and welcoming Lord and Lady Willingdon to Trivandrum. And this is December 1933. And Willingdon is in Trivandrum to inaugurate the water supply to the Trivandrum city. So she's shot the preparation that's on, and you have the Willingdon procession coming in and all that. You'll see all that. It's just less than a minute actually. And then you have the next film is Life in the Western Ghats. She calls it Wayanad, but Wayanad, South Malabar, and you find a captive elephant being fed, etc. You have a third one, which is in the Panyans of South Malabar, a primitive hill tribe. And then you have the Kanikars, another hill tribe of Travancore. And then finally she's reached Munnar. And this is, the title is The Tamil Women in Tea Gardens, and it should be the high ranges in Pyramid. And here you'll also, if you care to notice, people playing with bear cubs, 2 bear cubs. So this is the kind of Kodak camera that I have not been able to locate the camera. The camera is not around. So I'm just going to play this film, and that is supported by a Mac, not by this one. So I think Ravi is going to. Yeah, so that was the end of the presentation. Thanks.
We have time for, thanks so much, Preetha. Thank you. Thanks for sharing the film as well. We have time for a few questions.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you think is that because the Travancore in the 1930s or 1920s to 1930s was ruled by a region? That's the reason why Eileen and Janaki, they decided to stay there. It was a women ruler there. So is that anyway related to why they got a job there and not any other part of India?
It's a wonderful observation, and which is one of the projects that I'm doing, which is that of the princely states and science, and where I'm actually arguing that the princely states actually provided positions, places for several kinds of categories of people, including women. And that's why, in the case of Travancore and Mysore, Baroda, at least these three I've been studying, you find people, women in particular, finding women and people who are really outliers. People say who've been exiled, who've come away from Nazi Germany, they find a place again. Those who've been on the run, they find a place in the princely states. So it's not just Travancore, this enlightened Maharani. In this particular time, yes, because she establishes the Maharaja's College for Women, but Janaki is actually employed in the Maharaja's College of Science, which is an all-men's college. And as I said, the Maharani's enlightenment, has had its impact on the policy, state policy, with respect to education of girls and women in particular. All of that, but princely states in general have actually, they were willing to take this risk of appointing people who are doing experimental things, for instance, and also women. Yeah.
Thank you.
I will be, of course, doing all that in the book, in another book, working on episodes. Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's a good one.
Scholar of feminist friendships and have both feminists in the UK and in the US, also of course in 80s. This is a question that I have around methodology. I mean, in the sense that I can see that you also relied a lot on letters and correspondence primarily to draw out the friendship between Janaki Ammal and Eileen. I'm just curious as to whether speculation plays a role in this, in terms of reading between the lines, or where there are gaps in the story. How do you sort of understand this friendship when there are bits and pieces which are not recorded perhaps in the letters and correspondence?
So I have two questions. I have a question for you, Rab.
Sure.
Do you know if there's any other source that you can think of that would help reconstructing friendships, other than correspondence? Just asking you. Because you say that I also did it, but how else? Well, how else would you? I don't know where you can really. It is correspondence that really helps you build stories about relationships, isn't it?
So
I was wondering whether you had something else in mind.
I mean, I saw that it also looked at newspaper articles and interviews.
But that's really not. But that is just an aside. That is just, telling the correspondent that I'm going to India because my friends invited me. But the actual thing doesn't happen because of that, right? The actual thing is the relationship, which is a long-standing relationship that she's built up with Janaki, which is really the primary reason. And that comes through correspondence. Now, coming to your more important question, the second one. As a historian, a good historian, a rigorous historian, is this not going to depend on, not going to read between lines? Of course, you do it. But even if you have a hunch of something, you need to establish that. You need to provide evidence for it. And you will not just be looking at one source. So you always try and corroborate. You always try to cross-check. So it's not just letters between Janaki and Eileen, but you also look at correspondence between, say, Frida Blanchard, who's a common friend, and, say, their mentor Bartlett, for instance. and say the Darlington correspondence, which is Darlington and Janaki, Darlington and Eileen. I mean, you know, it's great for us because you have a wonderfully, you know, built up archive for several people. Of course, you didn't have anything for Eileen. You didn't have anything for Janaki. I had to literally, these are all embedded. So it would be part of a collection called Darlington Correspondence, or it would be part of a collection called the Michigan Botanical Garden Correspondence, or it would be within the Bartlett Correspondence. So it is not something that you'd find an Eileen correspondence or a Janaki correspondence, except say for the Darlington one in the Baudelaire in Oxford. So you literally have to build up an archive. You've got to build it up. And just luckily, I mean, you've got to be a sleuth. You've got to approach it forensically. You also have to be very intuitive. This is my experience. You have to be. When you know that something ought to be there ought to be correspondence between Bartlett and Eileen or Bartlett and Janaki on a particular thing, but you haven't found it, does not mean that it is not there. It is somewhere. It's lost somewhere. So then you work it out. And then you might just be lucky sometimes, but then you've got to be very, very, you know, you really have to be a sleuth. Yeah.
Did you find that you could access more of, say, Eileen's correspondence and not Janaki's? Was it something like that? Did you find that the Indian side was less archived? Were there struggles around that? Because I find that.
So what I was trying to say was Eileen is completely unknown. In America too, in England too, she's unknown. So it isn't as if Eileen is known at all. So I'm looking, and what I'm actually telling you today is something that people haven't known the existence of Eileen Erlanson, despite the amazing life that she's lived. Of course, like you say, to actually find, which people like Venkat and the archives of the NCBS are doing, is to build up such an archive. It could be an oral history archive. It could be, it's a painstaking process because, you know, to actually find material, it's also, it depends a lot on trust, on building relationships. Like I build with someone, say a descendant of the family, and I cannot breach that trust sometimes. So I'm unable to say, share it just like that or expose them, as it were, and, you know, because they may not want it to be in the public in that sense. But in India, to actually have archives for, leave alone women, you don't even have it for C.V. Raman, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic talk. I was just wondering, and you just sort of referred to it in your last sentence here. You said that Eileen's work and a lot of the artifacts that she'd collected from India remain in some museum in America. Is there anything that survives in museums in India, both from Janaki's work or Eileen's work? Are they ever even any allusions to their work at all?
You mean these ethnographic artifacts? I mean, why would, I mean, local museums are not interested in these things, right? This is more for anthropology museums in the West, unless they're very ancient.
Yeah, it still talks about tribes of our country and, you know, genetic work about our people. In that sense, is there a surviving documentation of that in our country at all?
I did not catch your
because
last...
the research is based on people of our country, is there any surviving?
You mean India?
Yeah.
Because I don't really go into identifications with our country and my country or anything. So if you could say India, it makes sense to me. So you are wondering if Eileen's artifacts are in India. The intention of collecting these were to take it to America. Why would she want a child's rattle to be kept in the local museum? Why would they keep it? This is a curiosity. These ethnographic artifacts are curiosities in the Western Museum. Yeah. So she can build up a certain narrative around these. She's also filming, you know, people from here, groups from here. So you can't expect them in the local archives. I would not expect them in the local museum or anything of the sort. Including herbarium, of course, if you're talking about plants. If you're talking about the plants is it's not just Eileen and Janaki, but there are a whole lot of botanists who are actually collecting for what's called the Madras herbarium, which is situated in Coimbatore. And that depends on the species or the variants, or that's another project, like they were trying to build a flora of Malabar, flora of Travancore, and they've contributed towards the flora of Travancore. But flora of Travancore in those countries which lack plants here. So she wants to become more useful for them, right? Because that's why she's going to return. But the thing is, the story doesn't end here. She comes back and she carries on. Eileen is in India again in the 1970s. She's in India and she continues to be in India till the late 1940s. There's a lot that she's doing after this. This is just 1933 to 36. She's then off to Bengal. There's these wonderful films of Burning Ghats of Benares. She's filmed, the Himalaya. She's Tibet and so much. So I'm working on those. I'm actually restoring those and photographing those frame by frame. It's a very painstaking job. And then if it's possible, I need to sort of join them because they all break off. They can't be sort of wound and, played as a film because they would just keep breaking off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Preetha, and thanks to all of you for being here. We will continue this conversation over refreshments, which are just outside this room. And thanks, Preetha, so much for sharing the film and for sharing your work.
My pleasure. Thanks very much to all of you.